Ask you, are you surprised at all how guys are pairing up and we've got now these two-player super teams that are kind of encompassing the entire league? And then along with that, does that make Kevin Love maybe that much more attractive to a couple of additional teams who might be looking for that third guy to pair with these two-team superstars now?
So I'm not surprised. I guess I'm partially surprised that we've gone from an era of the big three to if we feel like we have two superstars because it's too tough to get a third superstar because of the cap situation. That's a little bit surprising to me. But at the same time, like, this is, as much as LeBron-James' legacy is going to be one of the greatest players of all time and the guy who delivered a championship to Cleveland and has 3 titles now, his legacy is also going to be tied to what he's done for the players. He's empowered players. He's given them a say in their lives and in their careers. And before LeBron made the decision to leave Cleveland for Miami in 2010, you just didn't see it to this particular level. You saw it, sure, it happened, just not to this particular level where all these different players, if they're a superstar, they feel empowered to try and get a trade, or they feel empowered to make a decision to go somewhere else in free agency. In terms of Kevin Love, I mean, when it comes to the Cavs and their stance on Kevin, it has not changed. If they get blown away by an offer for Kevin, of course, they will consider it. They have to. They'd be foolish not to, because where they are in this particular rebuild and where Kevin is in his life and his career, it doesn't align perfectly. But I think that kind of deal, guys, is more likely to happen at the trade deadline in February, if it even does. Because one, that allows Kevin to do the intangible things that the Cavs value. He can take pressure off Darius-Garland and Collin-Sexton and Kevin Porter Jr. and Dylan-Windler. He can set the tone for the team. He can set the culture for the team. He can teach all those guys how to be a pro. He can probably flourish in John-Beilein's system that's going to center on Kevin. And he's probably going to get better opportunities in terms of shots than he did last year, because the Cavs are going to have a more talented roster. At least the belief is they're going to have a more talented roster because Collin's going to be 1 year older and Darius-Garland is going to be here and some other guys are going to be here. So that could theoretically allow Kevin to boost his trade value a little bit, because he's coming off a year that was a terrible one for him. He didn't play, and when he did play, his numbers weren't very good. So I think everything points to the Cavs, if they do move Kevin, and I'm not saying that it's something at their top of the list of things that they want to do, but if they do, I think February trade deadline makes more sense, because you're also going to have a team maybe that's out there thinking, hey, we really have a shot to compete for a championship, and Kevin's the guy who takes us from a good team to a great team.
Chris, let me turn back to what you said about the players being empowered and all. If the owners did what the players have done, you'd hear the word collusion all over the place. But when the players do it, it's just something you accept, even though they're more powerful at doing that than the owners would if they were, in fact, colluding.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think more fans are going to side with players than owners, because I think it's easier to side with millionaires instead of billionaires. and I think when it comes to business and in life, like, right, you want to, like, obviously you have bosses and things like that where they're going to control a lot of what you do. But at the same time, you have your own choices to make in life too, when it comes to which high school you're going to go to, college you're going to go to, and stuff like that. So I get that fans may not like the fact that these players can get out of their contracts at certain points when they're under contract. But I think because of who they are and the status that they've reached in this particular profession, I think that's just the reality of the situation. And I like the fact that players are in control of what they're going to do in their lives and in their careers. I think it should be that way.
Do you think, Chris, it's a good thing for the league that the players are kind of doing that? Because obviously there's some really appealing places to play and live and some that aren't quite as appealing.
Sure. And I understand where you're coming from, Dave, and I think it makes sense. I don't know that this means, because we had this shift in a lot of these changes in free agency. Like, I don't know that this means that all of a sudden some of these small market teams are out completely. You know what I mean? Like, I think that's the conclusion that a lot of people are going to. But look, Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant didn't pick the big team in New York. They picked the other team in New York, the quote unquote other team in New York. Kawhi Leonard and Paul George didn't pick the big team in Los Angeles, the Lakers, the main one. They picked the other team in Los Angeles, the Clippers. And just last year, Paul George, before he decided to get out of Oklahoma City and go back to Los Angeles, which is his home, he chose Oklahoma City. They traded for him and they gave him a chance to say, hey, this is what we're all about. This is what it's like to play with Russ. And then Paul George, at that time, signed on with Oklahoma City. So I think there are other things that go into whether a guy is going to go somewhere either in free agency or he's going to request a trade to a specific place. Money plays into it. Role is going to play into it. Location's going to play into it, because that's just life. But I think there are other factors involved as well. And I think if you do things the right way, as Brooklyn did, and you establish a culture, Brooklyn was more appealing than the New York Knicks. When's the last time you thought that was going to happen? So,
one thing, what's happened here in the last couple of years is when LeBron was here in Cleveland, the East was clearly the better, I think, had more franchises that were good. And they really turned that around quickly, with LeBron moving to LA and then other players following suit. So you've got to change, and you've got a whole bunch of average or less than average teams left in the East. Cavaliers would have to improve just to be average, but they have shifted the talent level at this point. The other thing I think the NBA might be concerned about is so many super teams and super players out on the West Coast, and the average fan on the East Coast won't stay up at night to watch all these teams. Is that something they're worried about, or do they just care that they've strengthened those markets you talked about?
I think all those things matter, and I think you saw, based on the ratings this past year, LeBron thought him going to Los Angeles was going to be enormous for the NBA, and he goes to the tradition-rich Los Angeles Lakers. But those things that you brought up happened. They play at 10:30. They're out on the West Coast, and fans on the East Coast aren't going to stay up and watch Los Angeles Lakers games and things along those lines. I think the NBA has a lot of things that they're quote-unquote concerned about. I think when it comes to free agency and this sort of thing, it's more about how fast the deals got done, and the fact that free agency became what it became this past summer, as opposed to what the NBA was hoping that it would become.
Chris,
and I don't think there's any way to stop the tampering, but I think the NBA is concerned about that.
We got to move along, but we appreciate your insight in helping us out and understand what J.R. Smith all means, and if the Cavaliers can somehow make do with whatever happened here today.
Sounds good. I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. And I was on the phone with people earlier today, talking to as many people as possible. It's confusing.
All right. Chris Fedor, cleveland.com, and of course the Plain Dealer. Thanks, Chris. Have a great night.
Yep, you got it.
216